So, thank you. So, Allison, I would like to bring Allison down for our final segment. Allison Pearson.
I should say we're very lucky that Mark's here because he's normally arrested. So rare is the moment when he's not in the embrace of a Metropolitan Police officer.
When you say embrace. And I've been able to add German police officers to the list now.
Yeah.
But Allison, a little bit like Emily, the first time I met you was also on the street.
Yes.
You were, well, shortly after October the 7th, I think it was November actually, you put out a call in the newspaper and said that you were going to be by the Churchill statue.
Yes.
And it was on, I guess, Remembrance Sunday.
Yes.
And there you were, making this clarion call to people that they should stand up for civilization, just barely a month or so after October the 7th. And as I mentioned earlier, you were also one of the founders of the British Friends of Israel.
Yes.
And I have to say, we've got to give them another round of applause. Because they were so quick and so clear. They had very clear statements that they stood with Israel, that Israel had the right to defend itself. And they were immediate. And a lot of people, I think, had the confidence and clarity as a consequence of this. It just presented a marker that people could refer to. And then obviously you're a well-known journalist, a well-known interviewer, and I guess that's what we're going to talk about now. Some of the people that you've interviewed, some of the major names that people in this room who've been campaigning will know about around the hostages and around the war and around Gaza. So welcome, Allison. Thank you.
How British Friends of Israel came about was the friend Laura Dodsworth. Some of you will know her as the marvellous author of Free Your Mind. She was a great sort of COVID campaigner. And Laura WhatsApped me, I think it was just a couple of days after the 7th of October, and she said, I feel so helpless, what can we do? And it was already clear that these really ugly protests had started, particularly that one outside the Israeli embassy, and they were still retrieving the bodies, and many of the kibbutzes hadn't even been reached yet, and it was pretty obvious how ugly it was. So a number of us, Toby Young, Jan, a number of us decided that we would try to get some signatories to the October Declaration. And a lot of great people came forward. And the thing that really struck me was Sir Tom Stoppard, who I believe is our greatest living writer now. And Tom gave a typically nuanced statement, but he said that when all the territorial dust has died down, will this not ultimately be seen as a battle between civilization and barbarism? And I have to say, we've all been through some very bumpy times. Not the easiest calling in the world being a British Friend of Israel, I can tell you. But I have never, ever wavered. It's a battle between civilization and barbarism. It really is.
And this is the third event that the British Friends of Israel has partnered with Our Fight on. So the other part of Tom Stoppard's thing, didn't he come up with this phrase that we're on the precipice?
Yeah.
And that was the title we used for last November's event, which you kindly spoke at. Yeah. So I'd just like to say on a personal level, you have been a supporter of Our Fight since its inception as well.
Well,
which has been...
you guys do all the rough stuff. I'm just typing, mate.
Not everybody likes rough stuff, so we are incredibly grateful that you...
Well, as Mark said, I have interviewed some remarkable people. I've interviewed mothers of hostages, two daughters mercifully recovered, thank God. Emily Damari and Roni Ganan. Hooray! And also, parents who've lost children. We've just heard from people there about the Nova Festival, which I think must be one of the most, notorious slaughterhouses of the modern era, if not of any era. And I recently was very privileged to interview Ellie Sharabi, who came out of amazing, and who's written a wonderful book, Hostage, which despite all the darkness it describes, is also a testament to, I think, to Israelis, actually, to the absolute spirit of, somehow I will get out of here. And
well, that was something I did wonder, actually. Because you were so clear on October the 7th, did you have some kind of affinity with Israel before, or did you have any...
Well, I know... Lots of Jewish friends. My husband works in America. Lots of our friends in America are Jews. And on October the 7th, my best friend, who lives in Scarsdale, Jewsville, I think. So she always says, I'm Jewish, honorary Jew. And Sharon started sharing some of the WhatsApp messages and footage that she was getting, some of which I don't think, once you've seen certain things, so, I was thinking about all the people I'd met and who I wanted to tell you about, but there's one person who particularly stands out. This is a woman called Shari Mendez. Shari lives in Jerusalem. She's an architect. She's in her early 60s. She has children, some of whom are in the IDF. But I just thought I would... This is very difficult, what I'm going to read out, but I'm going to read it out because one of the things that's very rarely discussed is the sexual violence of the 7th of October. And I think everybody should know about this, okay? So Shari Mendez was part of a small, all-female unit which was there to help take care of the bodies of women in the event of a mass casualty event. And people here will know that in the Jewish tradition, it's the women who prepare female bodies for burial. So on the night of October the 7th, having got an alert message, Shari drove to the Shura army base to join her unit. And these are her words. My first shift was Sunday morning. It was unimaginable. There were refrigerator trucks lining up as far as you could see. There's this massive intake area like an airport hangar, and it was packed with bodies. Body bags stacked one on top of each other right up the walls. Hundreds of bodies. The smell was incomprehensible. I don't even know how to describe it. You couldn't breathe. The smell was so bad. Literally gasping, struggling to breathe. The floors were wet. Fluids were dripping from the body bags. There was blood on the floor, so much blood. It was like walking into horror. Shari's first job was in the identification room. I can't overemphasize, she says, how shocking this was even to professionals, like they were forensic doctors, army photographers, army dentists, physicians, all in this room gathered around a girl's body, trying to establish who she was. Most of the people in my unit have no medical background. We're normal people, secretaries, lawyers, retail workers. And suddenly there we were dealing with things that no one ever thought you could deal with. Many of the bodies were so disfigured or destroyed, you couldn't tell if they were soldiers or kibbutzniks or young people from the Nova Festival. Some were just piles of ash. There's an imperative in Judaism that the modesty of the dead woman should be respected. Even in the rush and in the horror, Shari said, we said, please let's cover the body when no one's working on it. And everybody said, yes, let's cover her. I was so touched by that. You know that takes sensitivity in the midst of that unimaginable nightmare. And it was our job to do all the touching of the women that wasn't medical. If clothes needed to be taken off, we'd take them off. And it's important to give back to the family all the little personal effects. We were taking things out of pockets like cigarette lighters. Every single thing we wiped off the blood, put it in a special bag with a number to go in a certain box. to be returned to her parents. The team did their best to take off the jewelry. Sometimes it was very difficult. These young women had nose rings, and their faces were completely smashed up. And I'm squeamish. I'm working with a dentist, trying to take off a nose ring, and there's nothing left of her face but the nose. The girls were shot many times in the head, Shari told me. Why? We saw that these women were shot to be killed, maybe in the heart, in the head, but then they were shot many times in the face. And it looked like systematic mutilation because it seemed like they wanted to ruin these women's faces. A lot of them were young soldier girls, and a lot of them had been very beautiful. The first few we saw weren't too bad because they think they might have been caught in their sleep, and Hamas just shot them while they were asleep. But after a while, we got women who had clearly been awake when they were murdered, and these women came in, and their mouths, their teeth were in grimaces, and their hands were clenched, if they had hands. We got notified that a woman's coming in. She has no legs, so the terrorists cut off her legs. There was clearly immense sadistic violence. A lot of the women had bloody, stained underwear. Some had no underwear at all. Girls were shot in the breast, they were shot in the crotch, and that was not done to kill them. There was so much violence, and it was totally sexual. So Shari Mendes went to the United Nations in December 2023 to tell them about the sexual violence, the unbelievable depravity that Hamas inflicted on women and girls. And as well as Jewish girls, there were Christian, Druze, Hindu, and Muslim. The UN was slow to respond to the mass violation of Israeli women. Some of you will remember the hashtag #MeToo, unless you're a Jew. The UN is supposed to represent all nations, Shari said, and they had this exhibition there. It was the International Day of People Who Were Killed in Conflict and Terror Attacks, and they showed a picture of every single terrorist attack that happened that year, but they did not include October the 7th. They did eventually send the special representative of the Secretary General to Israel, and Shari and others testified to Pramila Patten. Her report said there were reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred across multiple locations of Israel and the Gaza periphery during the attacks on 7th of October. After October the 7th, Shari and her colleagues worked 12-hour shifts non-stop for 2 weeks, often sleeping at the base. You asked me, Allison, how could I bear it? You asked how we got the strength. I remember thinking I was just in shock, and everybody was just doing. We were using masks, and they were giving us lavender for the smell, but all the senses were being assailed. By the third, fourth day, I was losing it, and I thought, I don't know that I can do this anymore, but I had to. After the bodies had been definitively identified, they were taken to a second room, the burial room, where the atmosphere was calmer, and it was just us women, said Shari, with the young women. The team would look after her, showing all the tender care that was the opposite of her final moments alive. One morning amidst the grey, the team saw a flash of pink, a beautiful manicure with a flower on each fingernail. And that was such a terrible moment for all of us women, said Shari, because a manicure is such a sign of hope for a woman. They're making themselves beautiful, aren't they? It was the only colour in the room. Shari said, I tried not to know the names. I didn't want to associate them with their families, to learn they had a dog or a sister or a mother who was crying. I made that mistake the first day, and it almost destroyed me. I didn't want to know who she was. I had to keep going. Shari says she knew probably she'd be the last person who saw the young woman, and that's a responsibility because they could have been our daughters. So I asked Shari Mendes, of all the young women's bodies that she took care of and prepared for burial, how many were in a fit state to be shown to their parents? There was total silence, and she looked at me. I could not tell if her eyes were full of sorrow or glittering with rage. None, she said at last. Not one girl could be shown to her parents. I'm sorry, it's a lot. That happened, Mark, to those wonderful young women, and they should never be forgotten, ever, ever. And can I just say that sometimes I see these young women on these marches in London. I think, are you insane? Do you not know that young girls your age, what they did to them? I just wish that we could somehow tell them, because, they would kill them. Hamas would kill them in a heartbeat, right?
Yeah. And I think we somehow have to convey to people as well that as a parent, you're the parent of these young women here in Britain. I mean, this is what could have happened to your kids. Everything we heard on the sofa in the previous segment about parents' fears and worries. Some of them didn't come home. This is something that we need people to understand. These are normal people doing normal things on a Saturday morning in a small village of 1,000 people, and then normal kids going to a music festival, and then the torrent that comes out from what you described there. But what about when you talk to people over here about it, because your articles and your interviews seem to get actually quite good response in the Telegraph and places. How do you find? Well,
I think, the Telegraph, I think, has been very staunch, and I'm very proud of that. And I have to say, as a journalist, I just feel despair with most of the broadcast media. I used to be a television critic, and I was always been a fan of the BBC. I want them to lose the license fee for their coverage of the Jews. I really do.
And that seems to be the biggest cheer of the evening.
Do you know what? Night and day, we have to, people like my mother, people like members of my family, they pick up their information from these people. So they'll say, oh, it's terrible what the Israelis did. And then you ask what it is that they've done. So back in May, there are so many examples. I'm sure everyone here has been seething, which I am. But back in May, there was a guy called Tom Fletcher, medic guy from the UN. I woke up and I turned on the radio, and he was saying 14,000 babies are going to die in Gaza in the next 48 hours, right? I've been a reporter. I'd be asking, where's that number from, 14,000 babies? Where are the babies? What haven't they got? Why is nobody doing anything about this? It was absolutely astonishing. And sure enough, a few weeks later, the UN issued a retraction, and Mr. Fletcher said, I need to be more precise with my words in future. No, you lied. You didn't need to be precise with your words. You lied. And that lie, this horrendous man who attacked the Manchester synagogue, Al-Shami, said, shouted at them, I'm doing it because of the children. This information that's being put out, unscrutinized from, the Gazan Health Authority, like Hamas, everything coming out of Gaza is Hamas, okay? And there's another example just recently where a Panorama documentary talked about Israeli IDF firing on the aid convoys. I met IDF soldiers. There may be some rogue ones. I don't believe the IDF is firing on aid convoys. I just don't. And then there's now, last week, a retraction. Oh, maybe the BBC didn't mention that Hamas were firing on the aid convoys. So as you can tell, I'm pretty enraged about it. I'm also enraged about the fact that our Prime Minister this morning discovered that there's some anti-Semitism in the UK.
Yeah.
Ooh, amazing.
Well, I was going to ask you how you felt about that, because I've
written about it in the Telegraph tomorrow.
Good. Well, because so the reason I ask is because I saw a video a couple of days ago, which I remember seeing before, where you were interviewed before a campaign against anti-Semitism march. And you were explaining in those kind of clips that people do where you explain why you're on the march. And you were explaining that it was a terrible situation, that Jews didn't feel safe in Britain, and people felt endangered. But this was 10 months ago, this video. This wasn't 2 days ago after Manchester. This was you took. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about this sort of drive? We're trying to tell people what's going on.
Well, I imagine a lot of people, and certainly people in Manchester who were interviewed, I think there was just a grim sense of inevitability that it would happen, and it did happen on Yom Kippur. Obviously, incredibly distressing. I think people inside the synagogue, a lot of the men who were blocking the doors could have been, I mean, it was terrible, but it could have been a lot more dead, I think. And I think the only, for me, Mark, the only slight good thing to come out of it is it's there, isn't it, right? It's undeniable now. People are having to have, BBC, All My Bet Noir, having to have discussions about, there's anti-Semitism. And it was actually quite amusing for a few days that the BBC website and others had said that police were still trying to establish a motive.
From Jihad al-Shadi's motive, what could it have been?
What could possibly be Mr. Jihad's motive? And I mean, you have to almost just laugh, don't you, really? But as the wonderful surgeon said earlier, we have a terrible Islamist extremist threat in our country. We have. They keep trying to tell us that there's a far-right threat, but what we know is that there are over 40,000 jihadists on the MI5 terror watch list. So that's not very safe for Jews or indeed for anyone else, is it? So I feel just contempt for much of the political class, which I think that the Labour government has found it politically expedient to drop the Jews. That's what I think. I mean, that might sound harsh, but I'm afraid.
I think so. I think you're right. So we've overrun a little bit, apologies, but maybe you mentioned, when you mentioned Eli Sharabi, you said, and I know in your interview you said you thought you were going to find something negative and desperate, and actually you came away with the opposite. So maybe you could leave us with some comments and thoughts on Eli?
Yeah, I went to Tel Aviv to interview Eli for this book, and I was apprehensive. I think I began the piece by saying I'm going to meet the saddest man in the world, and I guess lots of people here will be familiar with the story, but Eli lived in Kibbutz Be'eri extremely happily with his British wife, Leanne. She never converted, but spoke great Hebrew, although Eli said we always argued in English, which I thought was very funny. And they had two lovely daughters, Noya, 16, and Yahel, 13, and the girls had had their birthdays in the first week of October. So when Hamas came into the house, the front room, the living room was full of party balloons, so it must have been like a scene from a horror film, really. So Eli and Leanne decided that they wouldn't put up any resistance. They could see lots of the kibbutz was ablaze, as Emily showed us some of those pictures. And he would go with them, and because Leanne had a British passport and the girls did as well, they would leave them alone. That was the theory, but Eli was dragged off, and I think they believed that Leanne and the girls were murdered very soon after, but he was taken into Gaza and held for most of it in a tunnel, 491 days, and I hope you will read the book. It's absolutely, of course, it's horrible. It's starvation and torture and so on. But this remarkable man came up with a plan for not letting go of civilized values, right? So every night he said to the three younger men with him, we're going to come up with some good things that happened today. Now, as you can imagine, the available menu of good things was quite limited, but he said, okay, so the very cruel one didn't give us the food today, so the less cruel one did, so that was good, or we had tea with a bit of honey or something like that. And they literally did it, and he describes it as building up a muscle of positivity. You know, we will survive. And his lovely young guy, pianist, he's in there with, he's still in there, Alon. And when I spoke to him, yeah, please God, he's going to come out in the next fortnight, please God. But, yeah. But just to say, I guess I came away from that meeting worrying that I was going to meet this man who'd suffered intolerably, came out, and the girls and Leanne weren't there to meet him. How absolutely. But he refuses to be devastated. He said, everybody gave so much support. I cannot wake up every day and cry. I just have to go on. And he's written this marvelous book. And we were joking that Hollywood was going to pick him up, and he's definitely going to be played by Brad Pitt. So it's all going to be. But just to finish, Mark, I would say that we may, on our side of the cause, civilization against barbarism, we may get disheartened, and sometimes I think, come on, Israel, help us a bit with trying to support you, because you don't always make it that easy. But if Ellie can suck that up and emerge positive, then so can we, right?
Thank you so much, Alison. Okay. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Alison.